Dead fish floated belly up in Silver Creek. Hundreds of them. The water, usually crystal clear, ran murky brown with an oily sheen that caught the morning light like spilled gasoline. I knelt on the bank, touched the water. Warm. Too warm for September. The smell hit me. Chemicals. Rot. Something industrial that didn't belong in these Pennsylvania woods. Then I heard it. Car engine, getting closer. If you're watching from anywhere in America where nature meets corporate greed, drop a comment about what you've witnessed. The sheriff's cruiser emerged through the trees, red lights flashing. Deputy Harrison stepped out holding papers. Pine Valley HOA was suing me for $2.8 million. They claimed I'd caused a flood. But standing there with dead fish at my feet and chemical stink in my nose, I knew someone upstream had poisoned this river, and they needed a scapegoat. Dead fish floated belly up in Silver Creek that morning, their scales catching sunlight like broken mirrors. I'd walked this bank every dawn since inheriting Aunt Margaret's land 6 months ago. But I'd never seen anything like this. The water ran brown instead of clear, carrying an oily sheen that swirled in rainbow patterns around the corpses of minnows and trout. My coffee mug slipped from my hand, shattering on the limestone rocks. The sound echoed too loud in the unnatural silence. No birdsong, no insect hum, just the sick gurgle of poisoned water. I knelt beside the creek, my 30 years as an ecological consultant overriding my shock. The water temperature read 78 degrees on my field thermometer, 20 degrees above normal for late September. Natural thermal pollution from sunlight couldn't explain this. The reading suggested heated industrial discharge. I pulled out my field journal and documented 7:15 a.m. Mass fish kill, Silver Creek, water temp 78 GF. pH strip showed 5.2 acidic enough to burn gill tissue. The dissolved oxygen meter I always carried registered 2 parts per million, well below the 5 ppm minimum for trout survival. Movement upstream caught my eye, fragments of blue-gray concrete tumbling in the current, their edges sharp and recent. I recognized the aggregate pattern immediately, high-strength commercial grade, the type Pine Valley HOA had specified in their Phase 3 expansion permits I'd reviewed at the township office last month. Fresh pour, maybe 48 hours old based on the hydration patterns. Someone had been doing major construction work upstream, and very recently. I'd just started photographing the evidence when I heard vehicles approaching multiple engines, which was unusual for my dead-end road, through the trees. I glimpsed Deputy Harrison's cruiser leading a black SUV with tinted windows. They moved slowly, deliberately, like a funeral procession. This wasn't a random morning visit. Harrison emerged first, checking his watch 8:30 exactly. The SUV's passenger remained inside, watching through dark glass. "Paul," Harrison said, papers clutched in his thick fingers, not quite meeting my eyes. "I'm sorry about this." 20 years on the force showed in his weathered face, in the careful way he positioned himself between me and the SUV. "Pine Valley HOA is suing you. $2.8 million in flood damages. They say you altered the creek flow." He extended the documents like they might bite. The timing was too perfect. Contamination appears. Lawsuit follows immediately. Someone had been watching, waiting for the right moment. I took the papers, scanning the accusations. 47 homes were damaged. 3 vehicles were destroyed. But the dates jumped out at me. The flooding had occurred Thursday night, September 23rd. Today was Monday, the 27th. They'd had this lawsuit prepared and ready, just waiting to serve it. "They're claiming I deliberately diverted water onto their properties," I said. More statement than question. Harrison's shoulders shifted beneath his uniform. "I just served the papers. Paul, you've got 30 days to respond." He glanced back at the SUV, then added quietly, "Might want to get a good lawyer." After they left, I spent 3 hours walking every inch of my property line, documenting everything. No dams, No diversions, no construction, just pristine forest and ancient creek bed. But at the northern boundary, where my land met the old logging road, I found something troubling. Tire tracks, deep and fresh, led to a hastily covered depression near the bank. I pulled away branches to reveal a recently installed 8-inch PVC pipe. Cap removed, angled toward the creek, industrial grade, the kind used for major water diversion. But the pipe led upstream. Not down, someone had been adding water to the creek, not taking it away. The implications chilled me despite the warming morning. This wasn't about natural flooding or accidental contamination. Someone had deliberately increased the creek's flow, added industrial discharge to poison it, then timed their lawsuit to arrive just as the evidence peaked on my property. I photographed the pipe from every angle, measured its specifications, and traced its path until it disappeared under the logging road. My GPS coordinates placed it exactly at the boundary between my land and the Pine Valley Development Buffer Zone. By noon, I'd compiled enough preliminary evidence to know this went deep. Pine Valley HOA's website gleamed with professional polish, but legal databases revealed President Victoria Hammond's 7-year reign of aggressive litigation. Foreclosures, liens, 6-figure settlements sealed under non-disclosure agreements. She ruled Pine Valley like a corporate kingdom, and kingdoms sometimes needed sacrificial lambs. The development's Phase 3 construction sat directly upstream, with stormwater management systems that could easily be manipulated to increase flow. That evening, as poisoned water continued its journey toward the Susquehanna, I sat surrounded by maps, water quality data, and legal documents. The concrete fragments matched Pine Valley's construction specifications. The water temperature suggested heated discharge from industrial equipment. The hidden pipe proved deliberate manipulation of flow. They'd orchestrated a flood, contaminated a waterway, and prepared a lawsuit to pin it all on the newest, most vulnerable landowner downstream. They'd made just one miscalculation, choosing someone who'd spent 3 decades fighting exactly these kinds of environmental crimes. Tomorrow, I begin building the case that would expose them all. Water doesn't lie, and neither would I. The Pine Valley Community Center felt like walking into an ambush. 300 faces turned toward me as I entered the emergency HOA meeting, their expressions ranging from curious to hostile. Victoria Hammond stood at the podium like a general surveying her battlefield, her silver hair perfectly coiffed despite the supposed crisis. She wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most flood repairs, her manicured fingers gripping a laser pointer like a weapon. The PowerPoint behind her displayed my property in aerial view, with dramatic red arrows pointing at Silver Creek like accusation marks. "There he is," Victoria announced, her voice carrying the practiced authority of 7 years ruling this suburban kingdom. "Paul Morris, the man whose reckless actions caused $2.8 million in damage to our community." The crowd stirred, whispers rippling through the rows of folding chairs. I recognized faces from the township, Robert Johnson from the hardware store, Martha Williams, who taught at the elementary school. They looked at me differently now, like I'd transformed from neighbor to threat overnight. Gregory Blackstone, the HOA's attorney, stood beside Victoria with the confidence of a man who billed $500 an hour. His presentation clicked to the next slide: photographs of flooded basements, waterlogged furniture, and a minivan half submerged in muddy water. Thursday, September 23rd, at approximately 10:45 p.m., he intoned. 47 homes in the Riverside Estates section experienced catastrophic flooding. Our investigation has determined that Mr. Morris deliberately altered the natural flow of Silver Creek, diverting excess water onto our properties. I raised my hand, refusing to be silent in my own prosecution. "I'd like to see this evidence of deliberate alteration," I said, keeping my voice steady. Victoria's smile could have frozen helium. "Of course, Mr. Morris, we believe in transparency. She clicked to a new slide showing Silver Creek's path. Our hydrological consultant, Dr. James Fletcher from Penn State, measured flow rates of 800 cubic feet per second during the flood, triple the historical maximum for September. The creek makes an unusual 30-degree deflection at your property line. His modeling shows this angle increased water velocity by 40%, creating a hydraulic jump effect that overwhelmed our storm barriers. The technical language sounded convincing, even to me. But that bend had existed since the last ice age, carved by 10,000 years of patient water. Victoria wasn't finished. Furthermore, residents reported hearing heavy machinery from your property on the night of September 22nd. Mrs. Jennifer Carter has provided a sworn affidavit. She produced the document with theatrical flair. Between midnight and 3 a.m., industrial equipment operated continuously. I live half a mile from the nearest property line, I interjected. My bedroom faces west, away from Pine Valley. The creek itself creates white noise that masks distant sounds. How could anyone hear machinery that doesn't exist? But Victoria had prepared for this. Sound carries differently along water channels. Mr. Morris, our acoustic expert, confirmed that creek valleys can amplify mechanical noise up to 2 miles under certain atmospheric conditions. Martha Williams stood, tears streaming. 3 generations of family heirlooms, destroyed. My grandmother's wedding china, photographs we can never replace. Her pain was genuine, making her a perfect witness for their narrative. Robert Johnson followed my workshop, 30 years of custom tools, orders I'll never fill. Insurance won't cover it because someone caused this, you caused this. Morris. The 2 testimonies painted a complete picture of loss, personal and professional, emotional and financial. Gregory Blackstone stepped forward. The legal remedy is clear. Full compensation plus punitive damages. Mr. Osister. Morris owns property valued at $1.5 million. We can and will recover every penny our residents deserve, unless he settles now, avoiding criminal charges for environmental destruction. The threat hung heavy in the climate-controlled air. Victoria added, "We're reasonable people. A quick settlement could resolve this. Otherwise, we involve federal authorities." I stood slowly. I've owned that property 6 months. The creek bend appears on surveys from 1890. I don't own machinery larger than a pickup truck. But here's what I did document. I pulled out my phone, connecting it to the auxiliary screen. Dead fish in Silver Creek. Chemical contamination from upstream. The water is 20 degrees above normal. Concrete fragments matching your Phase 3 specifications. The images filled the screen. Mass fish kill. Oily water. Construction debris with visible lot numbers. Then the crucial photo, the PVC pipe at my property line. This 8-inch industrial pipe was installed last week in a camouflaged depression near the old logging road, hidden by transplanted brush, to look natural. It's angled to increase flow onto my land. GPS coordinates confirm it's exactly where my property meets your buffer zone. Are you suggesting Pine Valley flooded itself? Victoria's voice cracked slightly. Someone poisoned that creek and manipulated its flow, I replied. Someone with access to construction materials and storm management systems. The concrete fragments were in a debris dam upstream, invisible until I waded in to investigate. Fresh pour from 72 hours ago, right before your flood. The unified anger began fracturing. Frank Peterson, the mechanic who'd serviced my truck, stood up suddenly. Wait a minute. I was fishing Silver Creek last month. That pipe wasn't there. And I've been hearing construction equipment from Pine Valley for weeks, not from Morris's place. Margaret Hughes, who ran the township's environmental committee, added her voice, "The water did smell like chemicals during the flood. My husband's an engineer," he said. It reminded him of industrial coolant. Voices rose as doubt spread. Some still defended Victoria, but others questioned the timeline, the evidence, and the rush to blame. Gregory Blackstone tried to restore order. The facts remain: water flowed from his property. But Peterson shot back. Facts or convenient stories? I've lived here for 20 years. That creek bend's always been there. And Morris doesn't even own a tractor, much less excavation equipment. I'd know I service every piece of heavy machinery in this township. Victoria gavelled frantically. Mr. Morris has 30 days to respond. This meeting is adjourned. But the damage was done. The crowd fragmented into arguing clusters. As I headed for the exit, Hughes caught my arm. That chemical smell document everything. Some of us have suspected Victoria's connections to Riverside development for years. Maybe it's finally time for truth. Her words confirmed what the fractured meeting had revealed. Their unified front was built on fear and lies. And it was already beginning to crumble. The morning after the HOA meeting, I stood knee-deep in Silver Creek with my field equipment, determined to document what they didn't want found. The water ran clearer than 3 days ago, but my dissolved oxygen meter still showed dangerously low levels, 3.1 parts per million. Barely enough for minnows to survive. The contamination was diluting, but leaving traces that would persist in sediment cores for months. Perfect for legal evidence if properly documented. I worked methodically, taking water samples every 50 yards, photographing sediment patterns, and measuring flow rates with the precision my 30 years of environmental consulting had taught me. The current moved at 4.2 feet per second, still elevated from normal September flows, at the property's northern boundary, where the old logging road crossed through a concrete culvert. I found the first major clue. The creek bed showed aggressive scouring in a fan pattern, the telltale signature of suddenly released water. Not gradual flooding. Someone had turned this creek into a weapon. A family of white-tailed deer stood frozen on the eastern bank, refusing to cross at their traditional ford, marked by worn paths. 50 yards upstream, I discovered why a dead raccoon washed against a log jam. Its fur matted with industrial coolant. The blue-green color was unmistakable. I photographed the carcass with scale references, knowing a necropsy could identify the exact chemical composition. This wasn't agricultural runoff or natural contamination. This was industrial waste, deliberately introduced. I followed the contamination gradient upstream, wading through shallows that revealed the next piece of the puzzle. The creek narrowed unnaturally where it curved toward Pine Valley's boundary, not from natural erosion, but from recently placed riprap disguised with transplanted moss. There, I found the engineered disaster, a makeshift dam built from industrial sandbags, sealed with quickset concrete. My experience with construction sites told me the concrete's color and texture indicated a 7 to 10 day cure time. The structure had been hidden beneath overhanging branches that someone had deliberately bent down and secured with fishing line invisible, unless you were standing in the water looking for it. My camera captured every detail as I documented the structure. The sandbags bore faded logos: Riverside Development LLC Building, Tomorrow's Communities Today. This wasn't random debris, but a calculated water control structure. The dam created a reservoir capable of holding approximately 30,000 gallons. When combined with the 8-inch PVC pipes I'd found earlier, which could add another 1,000 gallons per minute from upstream sources, the system could generate a pulse flood. The altered overflow channels Margaret Hughes had mentioned would then direct this artificial tsunami straight into Riverside Estates, bypassing natural floodplains that had protected the area for centuries. Movement upstream caught my attention. A man in a Riverside Development vest was checking something near the water's edge, consulting a tablet. His presence here wasn't random. I recognized the behavior of someone following a maintenance schedule. These structures required regular monitoring to function properly. He knelt beside what looked like a valve assembly, making adjustments while speaking into his phone. Water levels dropped too fast. The downstream dam must have been compromised. No, the automatic release didn't trigger as programmed. He was 100 yards away, unaware of my presence, confirming this was an engineered system with electronic controls. I retreated carefully and called Thomas Crawford from my truck after uploading all evidence to secure servers. "The sandbag dam you're describing sounds like a temporary detention structure," Crawford said immediately, "combined with automated release valves. Someone could time a flood precisely. The concrete work you mentioned, that 7-day window matches when the heavy rains were forecast. They were ready to blame nature, but when the rain didn't come, they triggered it manually. Can you meet tomorrow? I have original blueprints of Pine Valley's drainage system that show some very interesting modifications." That afternoon, I analyzed the full scope of their scheme. The improvised dam, the diverted overflow channels, the industrial pipe system. Together they formed a hydraulic battery, storing both natural flow and pumped water until released simultaneously. The topographical surveys showed how 5 years of subtle earth moving had created a perfect funnel aimed at Riverside Estate's lower elevations. It was brilliant engineering applied to criminal purposes. Margaret Hughes called with concrete evidence supporting her buyout theory. I found the smoking gun. Paul. County records show Hammond Industrial Services formed a new LLC called Flood Plains Recovery Associates just 2 weeks before the flood. They've already sent letters to flooded homeowners offering to purchase their damaged, flood-prone properties for cash deals closing in 7 days. The letters went out the morning after the flood, before any official flood zone determinations could be made. They knew because they caused it. But she emailed me copies of the letters, which contained telling language about repeated flood risks and inevitable future disasters. One homeowner had forwarded their property assessment showing the land value mysteriously dropping by 80% overnight in the county system before the flood even occurred. Someone with inside access had been manipulating property values in preparation for mass acquisition. That evening, I made one final creek survey. The water had dropped another 3 inches, approaching normal levels, but high water marks on trees revealed the flood's true magnitude 7 feet above any recorded natural event. In the debris lines, I found pieces of yellow safety equipment and fragments of industrial foam insulation with batch numbers that could be traced. Every piece of evidence pointed to the same conclusion: Pine Valley HOA hadn't just blamed me for a natural disaster. They'd manufactured one. Back at the house, I compiled everything into a comprehensive report. Photographs, measurements, chemical analyses, property records, corporate filings, all painting a picture of premeditated environmental crime for profit. Tomorrow I'd meet Crawford to understand the full scope of their infrastructure. Then I'd need federal investigators, because this went far beyond a simple lawsuit. They'd poisoned a watershed, destroyed homes, and traumatized families, all to buy cheap land for development. They'd chosen the wrong patsy. My career had prepared me for exactly this fight, and I intended to see it through to the end. Thomas Crawford lived in a modest ranch house 20 miles from Pine Valley, its walls lined with engineering awards and faded photographs of dam projects across Pennsylvania. At 72, he moved with the careful precision of someone who'd spent decades measuring water's power. When I arrived at 9 a.m. sharp, he was already waiting in his home office with coffee brewing and a single manila folder on his desk, not the overwhelming spread I'd expected, but one carefully curated file. "Paul Morris," he said, studying me with sharp blue eyes. "I've been expecting someone like you for years. Just didn't think it would take this long for Victoria Hammond's House of Cards to attract attention." He opened the folder deliberately. "I don't have everything. They were careful about that. But what I kept might be enough, especially combined with what you've found." The first document was Pine Valley's original 2015 Stormwater Management Blueprint, officially signed and stamped. Crawford traced the blue lines representing natural water flow. "This was the approved design: retention ponds here, overflow channels there, everything following code." He then produced a second sheet, this one a photocopy with handwritten annotations. This is what they actually built. I had to reconstruct it from memory and site visits because the modified plans were never filed. They called every change emergency maintenance or minor adjustments that didn't require new permits. The modifications turned my stomach. Retention ponds had been reduced by 40%, but the paperwork showed them at full size. Underground channels now direct water toward riverside estates instead of designated wetlands. Most damning were the valve gate's 5 critical control points that could redirect water flow entirely. The genius was in the incremental implementation, Crawford explained. Each change was small enough to avoid scrutiny. A pipe here, a gate there, always during other construction that provided cover. The township inspector, Mike Daniels, is Bradley Mitchell's brother-in-law. He signed off on everything without looking. How did you discover this? I asked, photographing his annotated plans. Crawford pulled out a water-stained notebook. I was hired in 2010 for routine consultation. When I saw the first modifications, I started documenting. But I had to be careful. Victoria Hammond had connections everywhere. I couldn't photocopy official documents without raising alarms. So I sketched, measured, and took notes. Some pieces are missing because I couldn't access certain areas without arousing suspicion. He showed pages of meticulous hand-drawn diagrams, measurements, dates the dedicated work of an engineer who knew something was deeply wrong. The most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. Your Aunt Margaret gave me this before she died, Crawford said, producing a small voice recorder. She secretly recorded a 2019 township meeting. He pressed play. Victoria Hammond's voice filled the room. The Riverside Estates flooding issue needs resolution. If natural circumstances were to demonstrate the area's unsuitability for current housing, insurance payouts would enable residents to relocate, opening the land for proper development. Another voice, Bradley Mitchell, responded, the system could handle it. 10 p.m. would be optimal. Most residents are home but preparing for bed. Maximum property damage. Minimal personal injury risk. Crawford paused the recording. They were discussing theoretical scenarios then. But you can hear the planning. Margaret knew they'd eventually act on it. He handed me the recorder. The full conversation is 40 minutes. They discuss timing, water volumes, and even how to create plausible deniability. It's all there. The quarry connection was the most complex piece. Crawford showed me a geological survey map from 1998. The Keystone Quarry dewaters constantly 3,000 gallons per minute of heated groundwater contaminated with limestone slurry. Normally, it's piped to treatment facilities. But see this. He pointed to a junction on the map. In 2017, during Phase 3 construction, they installed what they called a maintenance bypass. It's only supposed to activate during treatment plant repairs, maybe twice a year for a few hours, but with manual controls. They could dump that water directly into Silver Creek whenever they wanted. Wouldn't someone notice 3,000 gallons per minute of contaminated water? I asked. Crawford shook his head. Not if they timed it right. Late evening, mix it with increased natural flow. Limit it to 6 hours by morning. The evidence has flowed downstream. The elevated temperature dissipates. Chemicals dilute. Unless someone's actively monitoring during the event. It looks like general runoff contamination afterward. They've probably tested it during legitimate maintenance windows, perfecting their timing. Crawford pulled out a final set of documents, incomplete, but devastating. I couldn't get everything. Some emails I only saw briefly, and some plans were kept in Hammond's private office. But here's what I have: maintenance logs showing valve installations disguised as repairs. Purchase orders for industrial piping billed to erosion control. Inspection reports that Mike Daniels clearly falsified. The dates tell the story. Every major modification happened during other construction, hidden in plain sight. He handed me a USB drive. Digital copies of everything, plus photos I took when I could. It's not a complete picture, but combined with your evidence. He trailed off. then added quietly, "I'm 72 years old. They destroyed my career, but I kept hoping someone would come along who could finish what Margaret started. She knew they'd target her land after she was gone. That's why she left it to someone outside their influence. You weren't random, Paul. You were her last move in a long game." The final piece of evidence was perhaps the most personal. Crawford showed me a letter from my aunt, dated 2 months before her death. "Tom," it read, "the cancer's winning, but I won't let them win. My nephew Paul has the skills and stubbornness to expose what we've found. The land trust documents I'm sending separately contain soil samples, water tests, and photographic evidence from 2018 showing their illegal modifications. When they make their move, and they will, he'll have what he needs. The creek remembers everything. Make sure he knows where to look." "Where are these trust documents?" I asked, heart racing. Crawford smiled sadly. "Filed with the county clerk under environmental covenant. Margaret was brilliant. She legally bound the evidence to the land deed itself. It's been sitting in public records this whole time, waiting for you to claim it. They never knew it existed because they never thought to look at the actual transfer documents. They were too focused on the land's value to notice what came with it." We spent another hour reviewing specifics, but Crawford was clearly exhausted. As I prepared to leave, he gripped my arm. "Be careful. These people have invested millions in this scheme. The flood was just phase 1. Phase 2 is buying the land. Phase 3 is a $50 million development. They won't let one person stop them without a fight." His warning carried the weight of personal experience, and I believed every word. Driving home through fading afternoon light, I processed what I'd learned. The conspiracy was both more complex and more fragile than I'd imagined. They'd built an elaborate system over the years, but it all depended on secrecy and complicity. One determined person with evidence could bring it all down. My aunt had been that person, and now she'd passed the torch to me. Tomorrow I'd retrieve her environmental covenant documents, then contact federal authorities. Victoria Hammond thought she'd engineered the perfect crime, but she'd forgotten the most basic principle of hydrology: water always finds the truth. The county clerk's office opened at 8 a.m., and I was waiting at the door with my aunt's death certificate and property deed. The clerk, a middle-aged woman named Dorothy, recognized me from my previous visits. "Back again, Mr. Morris, still sorting through the inheritance." Her friendly tone carried no hint of the bombshell waiting in her files. I requested the environmental covenant attached to my property transfer, trying to keep my voice casual despite my racing pulse. Dorothy disappeared into the records room, returning with a thick manila envelope marked Environmental Deed Restriction. She explained casually, "Your aunt filed this as a conservation easement with perpetual land use data. Completely legal, many property owners attach baseline studies to protect against future liability claims. Smart woman, especially with all the development around here." The mundane explanation for such documents meant no one at Pine Valley had thought to check what Margaret had actually preserved within standard environmental protections. They'd been looking for hidden evidence in safe deposit boxes or private files, never imagining she'd hide it in plain sight within public records. I drove to a small park outside town before opening the envelope, needing privacy to process whatever Margaret had left. The contents were strategically organized into 3 distinct categories, each serving a different purpose. First, certified laboratory results from 2018 showing Silver Creek's pristine water quality before Pine Valley's modifications, establishing an indisputable legal baseline that would prove recent contamination. The reports came from 3 different certified labs, eliminating any possibility of error or bias. Second, soil samples with complete chain of custody forms, specifically targeting mineral compositions unique to quarry discharge. The chromium and limestone signatures were like fingerprints, impossible to occur naturally in surface soil. The most powerful were the photographs. But not just construction scenes. Margaret had photographed dated work orders left in dumpsters, equipment serial numbers on specialized valve systems, and most damningly, Virginia Hammond's own signature on delivery receipts for industrial piping that had no legitimate purpose in residential development. Each photo was time-stamped, with witness signatures from 2 different notary publics who'd verified the dates and locations. She'd built an evidentiary foundation that would withstand any legal challenge. Margaret had included a 20-page analysis written in careful legalese, disguised as routine environmental documentation. These materials establish baseline environmental conditions as required by Pennsylvania conservation easement law. It began, before systematically documenting how each sample and photograph demonstrated specific violations of federal and state regulations. Her strategy was brilliant. Everything appeared to be routine environmental documentation until you understood what patterns it actually proved to. One note particularly stood out. Chromium concentrations in samples 12 through 15 indicate Keystone Quarry source. Cross-reference with the USGS mineral database to establish the impossibility of natural occurrence. Note Quarry's unique geological signature makes source undeniable. I was still processing the evidence when Frank Peterson called with urgent news. "Paul, heads up, today's the quarry's monthly maintenance window. They always service the dewatering pumps on the 15th between 8 and 5. Except this month. I'm seeing twice the usual trucks and what looks like demolition equipment instead of normal maintenance gear. My cousin works security there, says management's been in panic mode since yesterday." His timing explained everything. They were using a scheduled maintenance window as cover for evidence destruction. Knowing regular workers would assume it was routine. The predictable schedule meant I could have anticipated this if I'd known their patterns. I immediately headed toward the quarry access road, finding the entrance blocked by riverside development vehicles as expected. However, I could observe from a hillside overlook I'd discovered during my property surveys. Workers with pressure washers and concrete saws were clearly removing infrastructure, not maintaining it. The urgency of their movements, the way supervisors kept checking their watches, suggested they were racing against a deadline. I photographed everything with a telephoto lens while calling Dr. Patricia Williams at the EPA's Criminal Investigation Division. "Patricia, we need intervention at the Keystone Quarry. They're destroying evidence under the cover of scheduled maintenance." I could hear her typing as I spoke. "Give me details," she said crisply, after I explained what I was witnessing. Her response was measured but encouraging. "I can get a preliminary inspection team there within 3 hours. Not a full crime scene deployment that requires more bureaucracy, but enough investigators to document and halt destruction. They'll arrive as routine inspectors, then escalate based on findings. Keep observing from a safe distance and document any vehicles leaving with materials." While waiting for EPA arrival, I met with Rebecca Martinez, the environmental attorney Patricia had recommended. Her Harrisburg office occupied the 3rd floor of a converted Victorian. Walls decorated with framed victories against corporate polluters and a map marking Superfund sites she'd helped remediate. She reviewed my evidence methodically, occasionally making notes in precise handwriting. "This is sophisticated corporate environmental crime," she said after 2 hours of careful analysis. "Your aunt built a bulletproof evidentiary chain, but we need to be strategic about deployment. File too early, and they lawyer up before we have everything. Wait too long, and evidence disappears despite our best efforts." We developed a 2-pronged strategy. Rebecca would prepare an emergency injunction based on the documented evidence, while I continued observing the active destruction. She'd also draft a motion to stay the HOA's lawsuit against me, arguing it was filed in bad faith to obstruct the investigation of their own crimes. "The timing alone is damning," she noted. "They filed within hours of the contamination appearing on your property. That suggests foreknowledge of the event." The EPA inspection team arrived at 2:30 p.m. in 2 unmarked white vans, just 4 investigators. But their presence transformed the quarry into a crime scene. They entered, presenting routine inspection credentials, then immediately halted all work when they observed the obvious infrastructure removal. I watched from my hillside perch as workers were separated and interviewed individually. The investigation team leader, a woman I recognized from a previous Superfund case, methodically photographed everything before allowing anyone to leave. Around 4 p.m., the crucial break came. One worker, a young man I'd seen installing pipes at the creek, broke away from the others and spoke animatedly with investigators for over an hour. Through my telephoto lens, I could see him gesturing emphatically, occasionally pointing toward the concealed infrastructure. Later, I learned this was Danny Morrison, a recent hire who'd discovered he was being positioned as a scapegoat if the scheme unraveled. Faced with potential federal charges for environmental crimes he didn't plan, versus cooperation that might bring immunity, he'd chosen to save himself. That evening's emergency HOA meeting reflected the community's fractured state. The atmosphere had shifted from unified hostility to confused division. Victoria Hammond stood at the podium, her composure cracked but not shattered. "The federal presence is a misunderstanding that will be resolved," she announced to a crowd of 400. "Outside agitators are trying to divide our community with baseless accusations." But the unity she'd commanded was gone. While some residents still supported her, primarily those from the unaffected Phase 3 development, who feared property value impacts, others openly questioned the official narrative. Margaret Hughes led the skeptics, her environmental committee credentials giving her standing. If it's a misunderstanding, why were Riverside development workers destroying pipes at the quarry? Why use concrete saws during routine pump maintenance? Robert Johnson added weight. "My nephew works maintenance there, says they've never used demolition equipment for service work. And why did the EPA stay for 5 hours if nothing was wrong?" But Victoria's supporters pushed back. "She's protected our property values for 7 years, argued William Thornton from Phase 3. "This is probably sabotage by developers who want to buy cheap land. We shouldn't rush to judgment." The room split into vocal factions, flood victims seeking answers, Phase 3 residents defending their property values, and a significant middle group torn between loyalty and growing doubt. Frank Peterson made the crucial motion that unified enough people to matter. "I call for immediate suspension of all HOA financial activities pending investigation. Our money shouldn't be accessible to anyone under federal scrutiny. This isn't about guilt or innocence. It's about protecting community assets." The practical threat to their finances swayed even some Victoria supporters. The vote was close, 212 for suspension, 178 against, with 10 abstentions, but it passed. Victoria's gavel strikes went unheeded as residents continued debating, some forming an independent investigation committee, outside in the parking lot. I updated Patricia Williams while frustrated residents streamed past. "The community's divided but moving toward transparency. Your team's presence shifted everything." Patricia shared crucial news. Danny Morrison, the cooperating worker, has provided essential testimony. He was hired specifically for the flood operation, told it was authorized maintenance to prevent natural flooding. When he questioned the legality after recognizing criminal violations, Hammond's foreman threatened his family's construction contracts. Here's the key: he's been recording conversations for 2 months as insurance. We now have Victoria Hammond on tape, directing installation of the illegal connections, discussing optimal timing for water release, even joking about blaming downstream property owners. Rebecca Martinez called with parallel progress as I drove home through darkness. "I've filed for an emergency stay of the HOA lawsuit against you, citing bad faith litigation to obstruct federal investigation. The judge granted a hearing for tomorrow morning at 9. Bring everything originals and copies." Hammond hired Thornton and Associates, the white-collar defense firm that handled the Marcellus Shale scandals. They're going to fight hard, claim this is all circumstantial, and attack your credibility as an outsider with an agenda. Be prepared for them to get personal about your consulting history, your aunt's activism, anything they can twist. That night, I organized evidence into multiple secure copies, uploading everything to cloud servers, Rebecca's secure system, and creating physical duplicates for different locations. The scale of what we'd uncovered kept expanding with each document reviewed. Financial records hidden in the environmental covenant showed Hammond had borrowed heavily against future development profits. She needed the flooded land acquisition to avoid bankruptcy. Danny Morrison's recordings revealed involvement from multiple city officials who'd received suspicious consulting fees. The EPA's preliminary field testing found chromium levels in Silver Creek that exceeded safe limits by a factor of 30. Each thread led to more crimes, more victims, more people who'd chosen profit over community welfare. Tomorrow would bring lawyers, judicial hearings, and the full weight of Hammond's resources trying to crush the truth. But tonight, I had federal investigators documenting crimes, a community slowly awakening to betrayal, and evidence my aunt had meticulously preserved to ensure justice. The tide had turned, and like the creek that started this all, it would follow gravity's inexorable pull toward truth. The emergency court hearing began at 9 a.m. sharp in the federal courthouse in Harrisburg. Judge Patricia Thornberry, known for her intolerance of environmental crimes, reviewed the emergency stay motion while Victoria Hammond's legal team sat rigid with barely contained fury. James Thornton, senior partner at Thornton & Associates, had the polished look of someone who'd defended corporate criminals for 30 years. But even his expensive suit couldn't hide the sweat beading on his forehead as he reviewed our evidence filing. Rebecca Martinez opened with surgical precision. Your Honor, the plaintiff's lawsuit against my client isn't just baseless, it's an attempt to obstruct justice. Mr. Morris is being sued for a flood that the plaintiff's own client engineered. We have documentary evidence, federal witness testimony, and ongoing EPA criminal investigation confirming this. She presented the timeline with devastating clarity, the secret infrastructure modifications, the timed release coinciding with the lawsuit preparation, the attempt to destroy evidence during yesterday's supposed maintenance. Thornton's response relied on technical objections and character assassination. Your Honor, Mr. Morris is a disgruntled newcomer with a history of environmental activism that borders on extremism. These accusations are fantasy, built on circumstantial observations and the testimony of a disgruntled employee seeking to avoid his own criminal liability. But when Judge Thornberry asked him to explain the EPA's preliminary findings of 30 times normal chromium levels, Thornton faltered. That's under investigation. Natural mineral deposits can create anomalies. The judge's expression could have frozen mercury. Mr. Thornton, I've reviewed the geological surveys. There are no chromium deposits within 50 miles of Silver Creek. Would you care to try again? The courtroom fell silent as Thornton shuffled papers, searching for a response that didn't exist. Judge Thornberry's ruling was swift. The plaintiff's lawsuit is stayed pending resolution of federal criminal investigation. Furthermore, I'm issuing a preservation order. Any attempt to destroy additional evidence will result in immediate contempt charges. Outside the courthouse, Rebecca warned me to expect escalation. Hammond's desperate now. The stay kills her leverage, and the preservation order means she can't hide anything else. Watch your back. Her warning proved prophetic. By the time I returned to Pine Valley, 2 strange cars were parked near my property entrance. They left as I approached. But the message was clear: I was being watched. I installed motion cameras that afternoon, suddenly grateful for my isolated location. The next morning brought an unexpected breakthrough. Michael Torres, The professional diver I'd hired to document the underwater infrastructure called with urgency in his voice. "Paul, I found something the EPA divers missed. There's more than just pipes down here. The September flood stirred up sediment that's been covering a control system for who knows how long. The water's finally clear enough to see it properly. Electronic panels, flow sensors, the works. Yesterday's clarity is the best visibility we've had in years." I met him at the creek within an hour, watching his underwater camera feed with growing amazement. The hidden system was sophisticated engineering applied to criminal purposes. Sealed control boxes connected to actuator valves, flow meters that recorded volumes, and most importantly, a data logger in a waterproof housing. "This memory card might have timestamps," Torres said, surfacing with the device. "But it's been submerged for months. Could be corrupted, encrypted, or both. You'll need tech specialists." I immediately contacted Patricia Williams. "The FBI has a regional evidence recovery team training at Quantico. They can be here in 4 hours since they're already deployed here. Electronic evidence in environmental crimes is their specialty." By afternoon, FBI technicians were carefully extracting the system. The lead technician explained, "These industrial loggers are usually encrypted and often suffer data degradation underwater. We'll need our lab to recover what we can. If we're lucky, we'll get 60% of the data, enough to establish patterns." That evening's emergency community meeting in the high school auditorium drew 400 residents. But unity remained elusive. Margaret Hughes opened by explaining Victoria Hammond's absence. Federal marshals served her with a summons this afternoon. She's currently being questioned by FBI agents and couldn't attend, even if she wanted to. The crowd's reaction was mixed. Some cheered. Others looked uncomfortable with the federal attention their community was receiving. "I've compiled flooding records for the past 24 months," Hughes continued, projecting a map. 14 incidents affecting specific neighborhoods that later received buyout offers. The pattern suggests deliberate targeting. But William Thornton from Phase 3 stood up, voice shaking. "This is moving too fast. Maybe there are explanations we're not considering. Federal involvement could destroy our property values regardless of guilt or innocence." Several residents nodded nervously. The economic implications were terrifying even to those who believed Hammond was guilty. Robert Johnson countered with concrete evidence. "My brother found property assessment adjustments in the township system. Land values dropped before floods, not after. Someone was preparing for distressed sales." This sparked a heated debate. A group of 30 residents, mostly from unaffected areas, argued for slowing down, hiring independent investigators, and protecting the community's reputation. But flood victims pushed back hard. "Reputation," one woman shouted. "My family lived in a hotel for 3 months because of Hammond's greed." Frank Peterson made the crucial motion. "I move to dissolve Pine Valley Homeowners Association immediately and place all assets under federal receivership pending criminal investigation." The debate lasted 2 hours. Some residents feared losing local control, others worried about legal liability, and a few even suggested Hammond might be innocent. But when the vote came, pragmatism won. 280 voted for dissolution, 70 against, with 50 abstaining. The 3 remaining board members, looking relieved, signed the papers immediately. Danny Morrison, the cooperating worker, made an unexpected appearance, flanked by federal agents. He addressed the crowd briefly. "I was hired to maintain what I thought was flood prevention infrastructure, when I realized it was designed to cause floods, not prevent them. I started recording conversations. I've given everything to the FBI. The people responsible will be held accountable." His testimony swayed some undecided residents, though others questioned his motives. As the meeting concluded, the community's division was evident. The flood victims formed a support group, planning collective legal action. Phase 3. Residents huddled separately, discussing property value protection. A middle group of about 100 residents seemed lost. unsure whether to feel relief or fear about their HOA's collapse. Change was coming to Pine Valley, but consensus remained elusive. I drove home through quiet streets, noting the for sale signs already appearing on some lawns, residents fleeing before property values could crash. At the creek, I met Torres again. He'd spent all day mapping the underwater infrastructure. "There's more down there," he said quietly. "Secondary systems, older installations. This has been building for years, layer upon layer. Each administration adds its own pieces. The full scope might never be known, but we had enough to ensure justice." That night, Patricia Williams called with preliminary results from the data logger. "The encryption's tough, but we've recovered fragments, 37 activation events over 18 months, each corresponding to reported minor flooding. Hammond didn't just cause one big flood she's been practicing, perfecting the timing. Every test run destroyed someone's basement, someone's peace of mind." The systematic cruelty was breathtaking. Tomorrow would bring indictments, but tonight, Pine Valley wrestled with the truth that their American dream had been built on engineered nightmares. The federal courthouse in Philadelphia buzzed with media attention as United States v. Victoria Hammond and Associates began. 3 months had passed since the underwater discovery. 3 months of FBI forensics struggling with damaged data, forensic accountants tracing Byzantine money trails, and prosecutors building their case piece by carefully verified piece. I sat in the gallery's front row, flanked by 47 flood victims who'd traveled together by chartered bus. Behind us, reporters from national outlets prepared to broadcast what had become a landmark environmental crime case. Victoria Hammond entered through a side door, her appearance transformed from the polished executive who'd threatened me 6 months ago. Federal custody had stripped away the designer suits, revealing someone diminished but still defiant. She sat beside James Thornton and 2 other defense attorneys, their strategy evident in the boxes of documents they'd brought, bury the simple crime under legal complexity. But prosecutor Daniel Rodriguez had spent 2 decades dismantling white-collar environmental crimes. He opened with measured force. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case involves the deliberate manipulation of water infrastructure for profit. The evidence will show the defendant created a system to flood specific properties, then attempted to purchase them at drastically reduced prices. However," he paused significantly, "some of our digital evidence has been compromised by water damage and encryption. We'll present what we've recovered, along with corroborating physical evidence and witness testimony. The picture may have missing pieces, but what remains tells a clear story." The prosecution's first witness was Special Agent Maria Santos, the FBI's lead forensic analyst. Her testimony revealed both strengths and challenges in the government's case. "We recovered data from the submerged logger, but water intrusion corrupted approximately 40% of the files. What we could reconstruct shows at least 23 activation events between April 2022 and September 2024. Some timestamps are partial, others are completely lost. However, cross-referencing with township flood reports confirms systematic manipulation." She displayed recovered fragments on a screen, corrupted data streams, interspersed with readable segments showing flow rates and valve positions. Santos explained the technical challenges with refreshing honesty. "Industrial encryption combined with water damage created data archaeology challenges. We recovered complete records for only 11 events. Another 12 show partial data. We have dates, but not times, or flow rates, but not durations. The remaining files are unrecoverable. However, the 11 complete records correspond exactly to reported flood events in Pine Valley. The probability of coincidence is less than 1 in 10 million. This statistical approach helped bridge the gap left by missing data. Danny Morrison's testimony provided crucial human context to the digital evidence. Under Rodriguez's questioning, he detailed his employment and growing suspicions. The turning point was finding purchase orders for remote activation modules hidden in routine maintenance supplies. Legitimate flood control systems don't need smartphone control. When I questioned it, my supervisor said it was for emergency access, but then I saw them testing it flooding specific streets at 2 a.m., timing how long water took to reach different properties. His voice carried the weight of someone who'd wrestled with conscience before choosing truth. The prosecution played Morrison's recordings Hammond discussing optimizing water release windows and target properties for Phase 4 development. The audio quality varied dramatically. Some portions were crystal clear. Others required enhancement that the defense would surely challenge. One particularly damning segment captured Hammond saying, "The September window is perfect. Insurance companies are slow after the summer, and the federal fiscal year ends. Maximum confusion, minimum oversight." But static obscured the next 30 seconds, leaving tantalizing gaps about specific targeting. Thornton's defense proved formidable. He challenged every aspect of the corrupted data, questioned the chain of custody on water-damaged evidence, and presented alternative interpretations for every recording. When he showed township permits authorizing drainage improvements, several jurors took extensive notes. "Ladies and gentlemen, the prosecution wants you to see conspiracy where there was only construction." They present fragments and ask you to imagine wholeness, but criminal conviction requires certainty, not speculation. His closing argument on day 3 left the prosecution visibly concerned. The case's complexity became apparent during Thomas Crawford's testimony. While his expertise was unquestionable, Thornton skillfully highlighted the difference between suspicious engineering and criminal intent. "Mr. Crawford, you've testified about unusual modifications. But isn't it true that urban flooding has increased nationwide due to climate change? Couldn't these systems represent aggressive but legal adaptation?" Crawford maintained the patterns showed deliberate creation, not management, but explaining the technical distinctions risked losing jury attention. One juror actually dozed briefly during valve pressure specifications. My testimony focused on discovery and documentation, but Thornton's cross-examination exposed vulnerabilities. "Mr. Morris, you've accused multiple corporations of environmental crimes over your career. How many resulted in convictions?" I had to admit, only 60% led to prosecutions, fewer to convictions. So you see environmental crime where courts see legal business. The question stung because it contained truth. Environmental crime often hid behind legal complexity. Rodriguez's redirect was helped by having me explain how this case differed. But damage was done. The turning point came through a careful prosecution strategy rather than a dramatic revelation. Rodriguez spent 2 days building Hammond's pattern of behavior through financial records, emails, and property transactions. Each piece alone might be explained away, but the accumulation created weight. The key moment arrived during Hammond's own expert witness testimony. The defense's hydrologist was explaining standard flood control when Rodriguez asked him to examine a specific valve configuration from the underwater system. The expert studied it, growing increasingly uncomfortable. "This is unusual. I've never seen this flow pattern in legitimate flood control. It appears designed to concentrate rather than dissipate water." His admission, from the defense's own witness, shifted jury perception noticeably. Hammond's decision to testify sealed her fate through accumulated small admissions rather than a dramatic breakdown. Rodriguez led her through technical explanations, each answer revealing more knowledge than any legitimate developer should possess. "You understood flow rates. Yes, crucial for property protection. You knew quarry water temperatures. Of course, thermal pollution affects development. You calculated flood insurance claim windows." A pause. "Market research requires understanding all factors." Each answer dug deeper, revealing someone who'd studied flooding not to prevent, but to weaponize it. The crucial moment came when Rodriguez showed flood victim photos while asking about her market research. Hammond's mask slipped. Those properties were holding back community progress. Sometimes, difficult decisions benefit the greater good. If proper development had been allowed, flooding wouldn't have impacted inhabited areas. She'd meant to sound reasonable, but instead revealed the calculation behind human suffering. Juror number 7 audibly gasped. Hammond tried to recover, but Rodriguez pressed relentlessly until she snapped. I gave that community everything property values tripled under my leadership. If some people couldn't adapt to progress, that's not criminal. The jury deliberated for 16 hours over 3 days, requesting evidence reviews 4 times. Their verdict was mixed but decisive, guilty on 19 of 32 counts, including conspiracy, wire fraud, and major environmental violations. Acquittals came on counts requiring digital proof too corrupted to meet criminal standards. It was victory tempered by reality justice served, but not perfectly. Conviction achieved, but not completely. Hammond faced 20 to 30 years. Her empire dissolved. But the full scope of her crimes might never be proven. 6 months later, Silver Creek flowed freely but was not fully healed. EPA remediation continued with 18-month projections for completion. Pine Valley slowly recovered new families moving in, attracted by lower prices, and the community's determination to rebuild ethically. The 47 flood victims pursued civil suits with criminal convictions strengthening their cases. I stood where this began, watching brown trout return to waters once poisoned by greed. Recovery was measured in small victories, each returning fish, each rebuilt home, each neighbor learning to trust again. The creek no longer served as a weapon, but full healing would take years of patient flow. Judge Patricia Coleman's courtroom was packed for sentencing day, 8 weeks after the verdict. Victoria Hammond stood in federal custody Orange, her empire reduced to a case number. The 47 flood victims filled 3 rows, their presence a silent testament to the destruction one person's greed could cause. I sat with them, no longer the outsider who'd inherited land, but part of a community forged through shared injustice and collective action. Behind us, reporters prepared to broadcast the conclusion of a case that had exposed systematic weaponization of infrastructure against citizens. Ms. Hammond, Judge Coleman began, her voice carrying the weight of federal authority. You were convicted on 19 counts, including conspiracy to defraud, environmental crimes, and racketeering. The presentencing report recommends 24 to 30 years. Before I impose sentence, I've reviewed victim impact statements from 47 families, psychological evaluations showing lasting trauma, and environmental assessments documenting extensive ecosystem damage. Do you have anything to say? Hammond stood slowly, her prepared statement trembling in her hands. For a moment, I thought she might finally show remorse. Your Honor, I dedicated 7 years to improving Pine Valley. Every action I took aimed to increase property values and community prosperity. If my methods were aggressive, they were motivated by vision, not criminal intent. The flooding was unfortunate but unintended. I maintain that I am a victim of misunderstanding and selective prosecution. The statement landed like ice water on the flood victims. Martha Williams gripped my hand, her knuckles white. No remorse, no acknowledgement of suffering caused, just the same arrogance that had enabled her crimes. Judge Coleman's expression hardened as she reviewed her notes. Ms. Hammond, you speak of vision while ignoring the 47 families whose homes you deliberately flooded. You mention property values while dismissing the father who carried his children through contaminated water you released. You claim misunderstanding when FBI evidence shows calculated manipulation of infrastructure to create disasters for profit. She paused, allowing the weight to settle. This court has considered the sophisticated nature of your crimes, the deliberate targeting of vulnerable homeowners, the environmental damage that will take years to fully remediate, and your complete lack of remorse. This court sentences you to 27 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years supervised release. You will pay full restitution to all victims currently calculated at $14.7 million. Your assets will be liquidated under court supervision. You are permanently barred from any position involving property management, HOA governance, or environmental oversight. Additionally, you will perform 2,000 hours of community service focused on environmental restoration upon release. The gavel kerwool with finality that echoed through the courtroom. The courtroom erupted in quiet sobs of relief mixed with exhaustion. 27 years meant Hammond would be 78 before possible release. As marshals led her away, she finally looked at her victims, perhaps seeing them as people for the first time. But revelations came too late. Bradley Harrison received 15 years for his role in permit falsification. 3 board members got 5 years each for conspiracy. The Riverside development foreman, who'd threatened workers, received 8 years. Justice had been served, imperfectly but sufficiently. Outside the courthouse, the media pressed for statements. Margaret Hughes spoke for many. This sentence doesn't erase our trauma, but it validates our suffering. We weren't crazy. We weren't imagining things. We were victims of a calculated crime. Now we can focus on healing. Frank Peterson added perspective from his decades in the community. Pine Valley will recover, but it'll take time. Trust isn't rebuilt overnight. We need to learn how to be neighbors again, not just HOA members. His words captured the challenge ahead. Legal victory was just the beginning of community restoration. 6 months later, I stood at the dedication of the Silver Creek Watershed Preserve, created on my 20 acres through a conservation trust my aunt would have loved. The ceremony drew 300 people, including state officials, recognizing the site's importance in environmental law history. The land that Hammond had tried to steal would now protect the creek permanently. No development allowed. Nature's rights legally secured forever. Educational markers explained the ecosystem, the legal case, and the importance of civic vigilance. School groups were already scheduled for field trips, learning how greed could corrupt infrastructure and how communities could fight back. The EPA restoration had progressed remarkably. Dr. Patricia Williams attended the dedication, bringing the latest monitoring data. Silver Creek shows 78% recovery in biodiversity metrics. Fish populations are rebounding, including species we thought might be locally extinct. Water quality meets all federal standards. The mechanical systems have been completely removed, their components recycled. We estimate full ecological recovery within 18 months. Her team had worked tirelessly, treating the creek not just as evidence, but as a living system deserving healing. The Pine Valley community had transformed profoundly through necessity. Without an HOA, neighbors had created the Pine Valley Community Association, a voluntary organization with transparent governance, term limits, and public meetings, where Hammond had ruled through fear. Democracy flourished messily, but genuinely. The flood victims had formed a support group that evolved into an environmental watchdog organization. Property values, after initially crashing 30%, had recovered to 90% of pre-flood levels as buyers sought homes in a community that had proven it could stand against corruption. The Watson family, who'd lost everything, including irreplaceable family photos, had rebuilt on their lot with insurance money and restitution funds. Their new house sat 4 feet higher, designed to withstand nature's floods while trusting that human-engineered disasters were past. "We thought about leaving," Tom Watson told me at the preserve dedication, "starting fresh somewhere without memories of carrying our daughters through floodwater. But this is our home. Hammond tried to steal that from us. Staying and rebuilding is our victory." His children played in Silver Creek's shallows, their laughter mixing with the sound of clean water over stones. I divided my time between managing the preserve and consulting for communities facing similar HOA corruption. The FBI had used our case as a model, creating a task force that uncovered similar schemes in 5 other states. Each conviction cited Hammond as precedent, her name becoming legal shorthand for weaponizing infrastructure against citizens. My Aunt Margaret's environmental covenant technique was being replicated nationwide, property owners protecting evidence within land records where it couldn't be destroyed or suppressed. Law schools taught her method as innovative civil resistance through documentation. The preserve hosted monthly community gatherings that naturally replaced HOA meetings. Instead of violations and fines, neighbors discussed creek health, planned volunteer work days, and shared concerns openly. The October gathering focused on establishing a scholarship fund from the remaining restitution money. The Margaret Morris Environmental Justice Scholarship would support local students studying environmental law or engineering. My aunt's portrait hung in the preserve's educational center, her determined eyes watching over the land she'd protected even in death. That evening, as the gathering wound down, I walked to the creek with the original flood victims. We stood where I'd first discovered the dead fish, now watching brown trout rise for evening insects. The water ran clear over rocks scoured clean by natural flow. A great blue heron fished in shallows where poison once pooled. Beaver had returned, building dams the way nature intended to create habitat, not destroy homes. The ecosystem was writing its own story of recovery, each species a paragraph in nature's legal brief. Martha Williams broke the comfortable silence. My grandmother's china is gone forever, but my granddaughter can play in this creek safely. That's the trade we made memories for the future. Others nodded, understanding the complex calculation of loss and gain. Robert Johnson added, I lost my workshop but found my community. We were just addressed before. Now we're neighbors who've been through hell together. The bonds forged in fighting corruption proved stronger than any HOA rules could create. As darkness fell, people drifted home. But I remained by the water. The creek gurgled its eternal story, indifferent to human schemes but willing to forgive our failures. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, ongoing civil suits, ecosystem monitoring, and community building. But tonight, Silver Creek flowed free, its voice no longer silenced by concrete and conspiracy. My aunt had believed in patient justice, in truth flowing inevitably as water, standing where her faith became reality. I finally understood her last gift wasn't just land or evidence. It was proof that ordinary people could stand against systematic corruption and win. Pine Valley would never be the same, and that transformation was the truest justice of all.